everyone. This is Jordan Bradford here with Jeff Beck, and you're listening to Just Ballin' with JB, brought to you by D. Oliver Design. For all of your commercial graphic design needs, visit DOliverDesign.com. And join us each week as we break down the best stories in sports and play some fun games along the way. So we're going to go ahead and get this episode kicked off. This is episode number 4, and we're going to do it a little differently this time. There was some breaking news here in the sports world within the last 24 hours. A couple of Hall of Fame athletes have passed away, and that's Dikembe Mutombo, NBA Hall of Famer, and LB, not Hall of Famer, I guess, but that's a conversation for maybe another pod. Pete Rose, so had a Hall of Fame career. We're going to get it kicked off with just talking a little bit about those two guys, and I'm going to start off with a little information about Pete Rose for our listeners. Nothing you guys don't know, right? Pete Rose, one of the best baseball players to ever play the game. All-time leader in Major League Baseball in hits, at-bats, plate appearances, teams played, and singles. Funnily enough, he had 3,215 singles in his career. And for most baseball fans, you know that 3,000 hits in general is a huge milestone, and typically the earmarker for a Hall of Fame career as a batter. You can get in under that number, but that's kind of always been the story, is if you get to 3,000 hits, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame because so few guys have actually done that. And not only did he do that, he did that with just singles, and he finished his career with 4,256 hits. Well above the next guy. It's going to be one of the most difficult, records in baseball to beat. 24 years playing, was a manager as well for a while. Charlie Hustle was his nickname for a reason. He set the tone, was a hard-nosed player. A lot of people have seen the video of him in the All-Star game. I'm going to forget which year this is now, but I think it was back in the 70s. He's playing in an All-Star game, and as he's rounding third headed to home, he blasts the catcher and a play at the plate. And this was back when you could do that, of course. And the catcher ended up getting seriously injured on the play in an exhibition game. And he was polarizing then, and he's been polarizing for most of his career. But Pete Rose, great baseball player, but, banned from baseball. So that's what happens when you gamble on the sport that you play. There's also a high likelihood that he was not only betting on games he played, but may have even, in fact, bet against his own team while manager back in the day. So, Pete Rose is a very polarizing figure in sports, but nonetheless, I think, the moral of the story is here, baseball lost an all-time great, and we'll have to see what Major League Baseball ends up doing. But, to this point, they've been pretty firm on they're not going to reinstate him as an eligible person in baseball in any way. So I always kind of thought growing up that Pete Rose would eventually make the Hall of Fame, probably when he passed. So now that time's come, we'll see what Major League Baseball does. Like I said, great career, but the off-the-field issues really put a big black mark on his overall legacy as a baseball player. So, R.I.P. Pete Rose.
Yeah, tough. Always sad to see anybody pass, obviously, but to see, what most people think of as a legend, always really sad. I think everybody would agree that we don't condone the off-field behavior that occurred, but one of those things, it's tough to overlook the statistics and what he did. And when it comes to kind of cheating the game, if you will, I don't think that's one that enhanced the stats that he ended up putting up on the field. Obviously, shaving points, purposely losing a game to win money is not good stuff. But again, it's not enhancing his statistics and what he accomplished on the field. Obviously, that's not the case for some other people that have, yet to get in the Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds, whether it's, steroids, corking bad, whatever it is, clearly trying to gain an advantage. And again, another topic for another day. Obviously, we could talk, hours on this stuff, but Barry Bonds is one I'm a fan of. I think getting in, seeing the product that he put on the field prior to when we believe he started using that stuff. It's hard. People make mistakes. Things happen. And again, I think, most of us growing up, our parents, that was like an idol. If you can act like him, be like him, you're not going to be the best, the fastest, strongest, all that stuff. But you can work hard. You can play hard. And so a lot of people looked at him that way. And so I think the fact that he spent the last so many years apologizing for what he did, his autograph tour, we talked about it earlier,
Yeah.
basically apologizing for doing it, telling kids not to bet on baseball, and I don't think it's a joke. I think he seriously feels that way. And, people make mistakes. So who knows? Maybe this will trigger an opportunity to rethink the conversation and see if he possibly gets in one day. But yeah,
Yeah.
always
Yeah. I
sad to
hope,
see a legend pass.
yeah, I hope so because, if you're a young kid and you go visit the Baseball Hall of Fame and there's no reference to Pete Rose in there, it just feels a little bit like, we're intentionally excluding a pretty significant piece of baseball history just because we don't like some of the things he did off the field. And yeah, I think that if we start looking under a microscope every single player's personal life and all the Hall of Fames, I think we're going to find some stuff we don't love. So, you know, shout out to his family. I'm sure they're going through a tough time right now, but Pete Rose, legend.
Yeah. Yeah. They say usually people are passing in groups of three. I don't know if there's another one we missed, but on the same day, another legend, an actual Hall of Famer, NBA legend, Dikembe Mutombo, pass away, sadly. I don't know if it was something they, as a family, were expecting, but, only 58 years old, passing away from a brain tumor. Obviously really sad to hear that. Just an incredible big man of the game. Legend himself, came from Congo, played 18 years in the NBA as a big man. Growing up, you see someone who's 6'2", and it looks like they could barely walk, 4 years in high school. You're 7'2", and 18 years, that's a long time on the body. Nearly averaged a double-double for his career, just under 10 points a game, over 10 rebounds a game. And probably what he was most famous for was the being able to block the shots. To this day, you see NBA players, kids on the playground doing the finger wag when you block a shot. It's truly one of the most legendary, moves I think of the NBA that you see, or mannerisms that someone would do. And to see it happen when they're still alive, a lot of these things after someone passes, you start to realize the legend they were and really appreciate what they brought to the game. But, Kobe, how many of us throw a paper ball into the garbage can and yell Kobe when we throw something in there, and that happened prior to him passing away. So I think the finger wag is right up there with that. 8-time All-Star, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, just incredible. Hall of Famer, as we already said. And also just want to give a shout out to what he did off the court as well. Did a lot for Congo itself, went back there, started a foundation in his name with really the goal to better healthcare and living conditions in Congo, which was awesome. He started a hospital there as well in his mom's name. They named it in. And yeah, they've had over 500,000 patients that they've helped at the hospital. So, just some really incredible stuff. You talk about peeling back the onion on a lot of professional athletes, and there's probably something we don't like, but Dikembe truly seemed to be a really good guy, great career on the court, and like I said, doing a lot of stuff off the court as well. Sad to see someone pass, in their late 50s. So yeah, thinking about him, rest in peace, and yeah, hope his family's doing all right.
Yeah, it's telling when you see quotes from former NBA guys like Charles Barkley and Michael and all those guys who played with him in the 90s and whatnot, and they all say kind of the same thing. As big as he was on the court, he was even bigger off the court and all the things he did. So yeah, just a great example of a Hall of Fame person and a Hall of Fame athlete wrapped in one. Gone too soon.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, sticking on topic of basketball, we haven't had a chance to talk much basketball so far on the pod. 4 episodes in, we felt like we had to touch on it, and fortunately some news came through that we're definitely going to discuss in a little bit more detail. But yeah, basketball is definitely one of the main sports that we're going to be talking about on the podcast. A lot of things come up in the offseason with the NBA. So, of course, the NFL is still going to be a major focus. We're going to be getting into some pretty intense games here. NBA will be ramping up. We know sometimes the regular season is not always the most exciting basketball, especially early on in the season. But want to touch on the big stories, things that are going on, whether it's trades, players moving. You see some big names, Paul George going over to the 76ers, just happened playing with an Embiid over there. Bronny is joining, LeBron in LA. Just a lot of things that are going to be coming up that I think are going to be worthwhile for us to touch on even throughout the, NFL season. So we figured today we might as well jump into the Karl Anthony Towns trade, give that a few minutes to chat about. Pretty blockbuster deal. Karl Anthony Towns goes over to the New York Knicks from Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Timberwolves collect Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle over to the Timberwolves. So,
Yeah,
I've seen some different grading on the trade, and looks like both got a B plus is what I saw. So I'm sure that's not every site, but looked like a lot of people saw it to be, fairly even trade, if you will. I got some thoughts on it, but what do you think of that, Jordan?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting trade because in a lot of trades, especially in the NBA, I feel like one side of the trade ends up being really lopsided because it's difficult to find equal value in the NBA. You only got 5 guys on the court at one time. It's not like the NFL where there are so many moving parts, so many pieces. With 5 guys on the court, one superstar can make a significant difference. So I just think it's really difficult to make those trades typically fit in a way where both teams come out a little better. And honestly, that was my big takeaway of this trade. I feel like both teams got better. Now, I don't know how much better, and I will say if I had to pick a winner, I'd probably pick the Timberwolves, just because I think that the fit that they needed, they were able to find, right? They had 2 big guys that were too big. You couldn't really play Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns at the same time, especially in the playoffs. They'd end up kind of hunting those guys because they weren't great for switching, and you just can't play modern basketball with 2 guys that big that aren't capable of getting out to the 3-point line on defense. So I like that defensively, I think they got a little bit cleaner. Maybe they're going to be able to use Gobert's skills more to, his advantage. We could talk about that on another topic or another pod topic, but not the, hugest Gobert fan. I think he's a bit overrated on the defensive side, but nonetheless, I think they got better. DiVincenzo, he played for the Bucks for a while. We've seen him play a ton in person. We watched him on TV a lot when he was playing for the Bucks, and I think he's a decent player. He's not somebody that's going to be your star, but if you need a guy off the bench or a third or fourth option on the court who can give you 15 to 20 points on a given night, I like him. And I do feel like the Timberwolves needed that. They need another ball handler, creator type player to go along with Ant. And I think they got that. On the flip side with New York, Cat is going to be an interesting fit there. I think that they needed a big guy. They lost Hartenstein, and they just feels like they got a lot of wings on that team, especially after the Mikal Bridges trade. So I feel like they did something they had to do, which was they kind of had to get a little bigger at center, and they needed to kind of offload some of those wing forward combos that they had. I'm interested to see the fit between Karl Anthony Towns and Tom Thibodeau, because if I'm not mistaken, Tibbs was coaching him in Minnesota for a brief stint, a few years back before he got to the Knicks, and that did not go well. So obviously I think Cat has improved as a teammate, leader. Seems like he's a bit more invested in basketball than maybe he was before. So it'll be interesting to see, but, Tibbs typically gets either the best out of guys or he runs them out of town. And I would guess with Karl Anthony, Towns' large contract, he's not getting run out of town. So my bet's that, Tibbs is going to get the best out of him this year. And I think we're going to see 2 teams that improved, even if it's just marginally. They both had good seasons last year. And if they can improve upon it, that's a win.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of what you said is pretty accurate with it. I kind of was trying to look at it. I think the way you finished it is exactly what I was trying to go back and forth on, saying both teams got better. Is it just marginally, though? And if I'm going to say, okay, which team got better in a way that they might be able to actually be a championship contender? And with that, I probably would go with the Knicks. I think you and I both agree we're not huge Karl Anthony Towns fans and don't necessarily look at him as a leader that's going to take a team to the finals and win it. But He is a pretty unique talent. I mean, he's a big guy. He can shoot the ball as good as any big man out there. I like Julius Randle. I'm actually a big fan of his, but his game has been a bit of a roller coaster. He has some really good stretches, and then he struggles at times. Decent shooter, but not nearly as consistent as Cap. They got a big guy still in Mitchell Robinson. I forgot they had OG Anunoby on the wing. You got Mikal Bridges and Jalen Brunson. I mean,
And
I'd be the
Anunoby
first.
probably has to play the 4 because he's not a
Yeah,
great shooter and not super like twitchy athlete
yeah.
to play the
Which I
3
like
against
because
some of these smaller guys.
between him and Mikal Bridges, I mean, they're pretty tall. So I don't think they're gonna. I mean, they might be a little undersized OG on whoever he's guarding, but he's also pretty stacked. I mean, that dude's pretty big. Where I don't think it's gonna like mismatch. So I think they're gonna be able to really guard, kind of those smaller guard wing lineups that you have, but not be getting crushed on the. I mean, just a lot of there's very few teams that have a big guy that's going down low and really doing work. I mean, Rudy Gobert might be super tall, but they're not throwing it to him in the post to
He has
score.
no low post moves.
No. Wemby's out on the wing as much as he's down low, tall, but, they're moving. I mean, Embiid's probably the closest you have, and we know he likes to get outside quite a bit as well, too. So I just think they're going to be pretty loaded. I think they're going to be pretty versatile with that team. I think with, kind of where the East at, and there's obviously the defending champs are there, and we were high on the Bucks, and Philly got better with Paul George, so maybe the East might even be better this year, at least the top part of it. But I feel like they'll be able to mix it up. And then there's, when come playoff time, any of those 4 teams, at least the way I'm looking at it, could make a run for it. Timberwolves, not that I don't think they have a chance to make a run. Obviously, they were, a great team last year, took out Denver, the defending champs, in the season prior. I don't know if that move is going to be a great fit. Again, I like Julius Randle. I think he's more of a playmaker for that team, which is nice compared to what Karl-Anthony Towns is doing. DiVincenzo, I think they said, made more threes last year than any Minnesota Timberwolves player ever in the history. So, I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty nice to have in there, especially like Malik Beasley and a couple other guys. Kevin Love was, had a hot hand when he was there. But yeah, I think if they're going to truly say, if both got marginally better, agree, who do I think has a better chance of really making a run? I think I'd probably give it to the Knicks, but I do agree. I think both sides got better. And really the only interesting part to me was, I think, just, the talk about Karl-Anthony Towns' contract. It sounds like, and that's also why I'm giving this slight edge to the Knicks, is I feel like the Timberwolves wouldn't have want to do that just straight up for the players that were exchanged, but I think they knew if they didn't make this move now, they might not be able to get anything for him. So it almost had that feeling. I'm not saying it means it's 100% correct, but like, we know we're giving up, a little more maybe than we're getting back, but we kind of got to do it now to get a decent return, which just, in theory kind of tells me that teams were probably in agreement, like, hey, we're going to get a little bit better end of the deal, but gotta make the move now. But agreed. I think it'll be better for both teams. So.
It does make you beg the question, too. Does Minnesota make this deal if they didn't sign Gobert to that ridiculous contract they signed him to that nobody would sign him to? No one would take the rest of that contract. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the Minnesota GM's office, and I wonder how many of these calls started with Rudy Gobert and ended with Cat. Because I think that if you had to pick between the two, I certainly think Cat's a better fit all around, especially in the modern NBA. I mean, I watched enough of Rudy Gobert's low post in the playoffs last year to know that he can't get better. Like that's just like he doesn't know how to play in the low post. Like it's not that he doesn't have great polished moves. It is bad. It looks like someone who's like never played in the post. You give them the ball and you're like, okay, take a hook shot. And they're like, I don't even know what that looks like. And I get it. He's enormous and like his hands wrap around the basketball. Like it's got to feel a little funky. Like, like us grabbing like a tennis ball and trying to like do moves with it. But yeah, I think that I like both teams after the trade. I think they both got a little better.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how they do. I think it'll be a fun NBA season. Clearly, we're excited to get into it. We haven't talked much about it, but we're going to have to jump into our first one-biter here real quick. These are just going to be shooting off randomly throughout the pod now. So, yeah, one-biter, President's Cup. Americans win 10 straight President's Cups, which is awesome. Nice showing from them. Got their sights set now on the Ryder Cup at Bethpage Black. That I really got to see something on. I didn't know all the rules behind it, but you see some of the European players not at the President's Cup. Those top 6 qualify for the team, but if you're already in the Ryder Cup, you don't get to be on the President's Cup. So it's an international, but excludes some of the best European players: Rory McIlroy, Victor Hovland, Ludwig Oberg, some big names. So excellent win for the Americans. Got to get it done. Bethpage Black for the Ryder Cup.
That's right. All right, well, let's go into college football now that we've been filled up with that one biter. Let's talk about the Bama-Georgia game. So that was the highlight of the weekend in college football, and it lived up to it. Absolutely great game. Alabama comes out just rocking. 4 straight touchdowns, 4 straight possessions, and their defense gets 4 stops. And you can tell Carson Beck and the Georgia offense just was completely rattled in the first half. They could not get anything going. I mean, the headline, at the end of the first half, the headline was definitely "No Saban, no problem," because they looked fantastic. Second half was a little different story. Georgia's defense started to figure things out against Jalen Milroe, who had an awesome game. I think they said that he was the first SEC quarterback with over 350 yards passing and 100 yards rushing in the same game. I believe is what I read. So that is
two touchdowns,
quite a game.
2 through the air and 2 rushing. I mean, heck of a game.
Yeah, I mean, he's balling out, and he's the Heisman front runner for a reason now. So he had an awesome game. But the defense for Georgia started to step up, and the offense also picked up and started to figure things out. Couple takeaways from the game, I would say, outside of it just being a great football game to watch. Kirby Smart's 1-6 against Bama, but I don't think that's as big of a deal as people are making it. He kind of made the point in his own press conference where he's like, "What's the record of everyone else who's played Bama that many times?" He's like, "I mean, I get it. Like, that's a shitty record to have. But at the end of the day, it's like, you're comparing my record to the greatest team maybe ever assembled, the Nick Saban, Alabama teams over the last, decade and a half." So, big win for Alabama. Ryan Williams, the freshman wide receiver who's 17 years old,
Awesome.
just looking awesome out there. 2 fantastic catches. One that he's bobbling and spinning in midfield, makes the catch. The other one, he has a sweet little stutter step spin move, takes it to the house. Just an awesome player. He's having a great season. Cannot wait to see what he does the rest of his career. But I would say, if I were Bama, I feel pretty good about that game. You beat Georgia without Nick Saban. Things have got to feel pretty solid at the moment. And if you're Georgia, I think you look at that and you say, look, it's going to be tough to go into Alabama and beat them, especially when they do have this level of talent and they're coached really well. We put up a dud in the first half, but then we figured it out. I bet Georgia feels a little bit better about that game looking forward if they were to play Alabama again. And I think those are the 2 best teams in the SEC. We'll see what Texas has to say about that here over the next few weeks, but awesome game, and really, really looking forward to watching more of both of those teams play, frankly.
Yeah. No, incredible game. I mean, I think it'll be game of the year, regular season easily. Just incredible how those 2 teams just do not disappoint. I mean, you watch a lot of scoring, it could be like, oh, there was no defense in that game. If there's no scoring, it could be like, it was such great defense, or it could be terrible offense. But those games, I don't feel like you ever feel one like a negative way about it. There's a ton of points, but the defense wasn't bad. You just know how incredible the offense is and vice versa. So, I mean, it's an awesome game to watch. I mean, you touched on pretty much everything. Just a couple pieces that were interesting. It was more about people's comments after the game. It was Jeff Saturday this morning, so big offensive lineman for the Colts for however many years, said he got a chance to meet Milroe. They went to the game, and his wife and kids were there. And he said he shook hands with them. He's like, this guy's a freaking beast. He looks like a linebacker. I mean, and Jeff Saturday's a big offensive lineman. And he was like, Milroe is enormous. So that was just shocking to think how big he is doing what he's doing, throwing the ball and running it. And then after the game, he mentioned Kirby Smart talking about the team. He's like, kind of that same philosophy as the 1-6 again. It's what do you really want? Milrow's probably one of the best running backs in the entire, in all of college, and yet he's able to throw the ball for them as well. Like,
Yeah.
what do you want us to do? We can't double team, Ryan Williams because, we got to worry about him, have someone looking at the quarterback. So it was just one of those, very honest interviews where you hear something that's just like, we're a pretty good team and we did pretty well, and we're not going to hang our hat, have an issue with how we played there. But this team's just, really good. But you mentioned Ryan Williams, just so exciting, so fun to see that. Yeah, it was awesome game. I think, like we talked early in the first couple pods, but the SEC is going to be tough to knock out the college football playoff. That's going to be for sure. So a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I've got what is that? Oh, that's a one biter I've got. The next one biter for everybody here is Chicago White Sox set the MLB record for most losses in a season this year with 121 losses. And to top it all off, their owner sent out a letter following the season talking about how disappointed he was in the season. But rest assured, all the guys from the team's managerial staff outside of the manager of the baseball team, but the general manager and the front office, they've all been working on this team all year long. So they're going to get this turned around really quickly. They couldn't do it this year, but just wait till next year. I've got a sneaking suspicion they're going to lose only 100 games in this next year. So a 20-win increase is right around the corner for the Chicago White Sox.
Someone said, I'm giving them a lot of credit because they held off for a few games. They won a couple games there at the end. They didn't want this to be the one to set that record. Like, well, wish they would have considered that, 60 games ago. Like, let's not set the record for most losses in a season. So, yeah, pretty embarrassing all the way around.
Yeah, it feels like if you care enough that you can affect the result in a positive way, maybe you should have been doing that all season long. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but just an idea. All right, next subject. So we're going to do something a little fun here today. We are going to rank our Super Bowl contenders. And we're going to do it a little different. So we're going to do it snake style. So it's going to go one after the other. So we each have our own top 8 teams that we think are Super Bowl contenders this year after the first month of the season. I haven't seen Jeff's, and Jeff hasn't seen mine. But we're going to go one by one, and we're going to throw one out there for number 1, and that's going to be number 1. So we're going to go ahead and flip a coin here. Jeff, do you want to call heads or tails?
Tails.
Tails. All right. It is
loaded coin.
Heads.
Yeah. So
heads. So I'll go ahead and take the first pick.
Yeah.
So I'll be number 1, and then Jeff will be number 2, and we'll go back and forth until we get to 8 teams here. So number 1, I've got the Kansas City Chiefs. And I struggled with this one. I wasn't sure I wanted to pick them number 1, but at the end of the day, I can't not pick the 2-time defending Super Bowl champs that are undefeated this season. And even though I think the vibes are a little shaky right now, and Rashee Rice is probably done for the rest of this season, Pacheco's going to be out for a while. I don't know how they're going to win a lot of games, but this defense is great, and they've got Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. So it's hard for me to knock them down past 1 until somebody actually does it.
Yeah.
So that's my reasoning.
I got the Chiefs as well. 1, I know I did every time, but that was where I was starting as well. I mean, undefeated, champs of the champs, till you knock them off. A lot of stuff going on, but no better person to figure it out. Mahomes make more happen with less. So, yeah, can't take them off that spot until they deserve to come down. So, number 2, curious if this surprised you or not. Surprised me that I even did it, but I'm going number 2, Super Bowl contender, the Ravens. Okay. Baltimore Ravens, number 2. 2-2 record. Obviously, that doesn't scream second in line for a Super Bowl contender, but they lost to the Chiefs, who we just clearly said in agreement they're the number 1 team. So they lost 1 game to the Chiefs. Solid game, first game of the year. They had 1 dud. 1 bad game. I think it was Raiders they lost, I think. And, I mean, just, teams come out flat off 4 games. I think a lot of teams have had a pretty poor showing at least 1 game. So throw that one away. Great win against the Cowboys, great win against the Bills. I mean, both of those, weren't even close. Every game, they are seeming to figure out how to fit Derrick Henry into that offense. I shouldn't even say fit into it, how to be that offense. I think he started 40 yards, went up to 80, 120, 170, whatever the heck it's been. I mean, it's gone up huge each game. So I think they're going to really get rolling. And I think that being your go-to game plan, run the ball, play good defense, if you do that better than anybody, that's a pretty good recipe. There's not a whole lot of risk involved with that. So I like where they're headed. Again, 2-2 record doesn't scream that, but I think the way you've seen them play the last couple weeks, again, Chiefs game, number one team out there. I think they're in pretty good shape, and they're trending very quickly to one of the top spots.
Yeah, I didn't have the Ravens as high as you, but I also liked all the reasons that you just gave. The only thing that kept me from ranking them any higher is kind of the opposite of the Chiefs. Is I kind of need to see Lamar Jackson do this offense in the playoffs, and I've been a little disappointed in what they've done. I think that some of that could be on the offensive coordinators, not running the right plays, getting too conservative, maybe getting out of the, trying to think outside the box. I do think this year you don't need to think outside the box because you've got the two best guys at running the football right now in the backfield. One of them also is a quarterback. So, I like it. I think they're a little high, but I like it. Number 3 then, and this one could be a bit of a shock, but I think there's some valid reason for it. But I've got the Vikings. I've got the Minnesota Vikings. I love what Kevin O'Connell's putting together there. I think that this is an underrated defense, especially with former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores running the show on the defensive side. And, he had not a great exit from the Dolphins. Ended up suing the NFL, but he is defensive coordinator for the Vikings, and their defense looks great. They have rattled off big win after big win to start the season. Sam Darnold looks like the guy that some people thought he was going to be when he was drafted in the first round a handful of years ago. And I think that it does kind of go to show you that if you get the right offensive play caller, the right quarterback guy, and you match that up with a talented quarterback, that you can look pretty good. Because Sam Darnold looks a lot better than Kirk Cousins did in that offense, and he's only 4 games in. So I like them a lot. They just keep impressing me week after week. I haven't seen them once yet look like they aren't ready for this moment. And I'm honestly pretty surprised that I feel that way because I'm usually not very high on the Vikings. But I think, Sam Darnold looks much better than they've had at quarterback play. And Kirk Cousins wasn't bad. So I really like the Vikings. I think they got a lot of weapons. Going to be a good team.
Yeah, I mean, they were in my top 8. Similar to the Ravens, did not have them as high as you had them. I think if you were an alien drop down week 1 and all you saw was this 4 games, you'd probably have them at number 1, which is fair based on just this year. You wouldn't have the Chiefs up there, right? I mean, even though they're 4-0, Vikings are 4-0 as well, looked a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of the same thought you had with the Ravens. We just thinking it in a different way, I guess. I want to see more from the Vikings. I get every week we've kind of thought here comes a collapse, and they've still shown it. But, I mean, Darnold has zero history for us to believe in at this point. The Vikings were not expected to come in this year and do anything. I get the defense has looked really good. The Ravens, I almost look at the opposite and say, yes, we've both been skeptical of Lamar, in big moments if he's dependent. I just think the way they're going to run this offense, they're not going to be dependent on him as much late in game situations. And to me, we've seen enough the last couple of years. We have that history. So although they did start slow, they're starting to show me, what we kind of expected them to be at. So they have a little history that I'm using for them prior to the season, which is why I'm a little skeptical of the Vikings. But to your point, I mean, this year, these 4 games, I mean, it's hard to argue with that, no question.
Yeah. So who do we got for number 4?
Yeah, I was going to say sticking, I guess, right there in the NFC North. I had the Lions is the next team on the board there. So I really like what they're doing. Only loss so far is to the Bucks. I think the Bucks may show up on this list. Curious to see where you have the Bucks and how I feel about them. But I think the Bucks are actually a pretty solid team. They've had some nice wins. Again, maybe we'll touch on them here later, but that's their only loss. like that offense. We were watching the Seahawks game. We said it's going to be a high-flying game, score a lot of points. I mean, they can put up points with the best of them. I mean, we think of Kansas City in that fashion, but we're not seeing that all the time. And Lions really are kind of putting it on people as far as points go. Of course, we need the defense to step up a little bit, no question. We can't be winning playoff games 42 to 47. I mean, you're going to have to make sure that defense steps up, but I think they have some time to do it. I think with the Bears looking like they're going to take a little bit longer to get rolling. With Packers, apparently Love's going to have to get back into his group. I mean, it's really looks like the Lions and Vikings in there is kind of going to be battling out, at least as of now. So I think they should be able to stack some wins early. I just think where offense seems to be lacking across the board, having a pretty potent one is definitely going to be something that can get you a little bit further than maybe even years past, just where things are at. So I like them. The 4 spot.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add there. I had the Lions right after the Vikings on my list, so I think they looked great. I mean, also shout out Jared Goff. He had a perfect game last night. He was 18 for 18. He caught a touchdown pass, threw for nearly 300 yards. I mean, just low key, just had a fantastic game. I mean, that is just going to be a game that he's going to remember the rest of his life, even if Dan Campbell didn't give him the game ball.
That's hilarious.
All right, so number five, yeah. So this one I don't think is going to come as a huge surprise. I feel like this is where we're at on the list. Buffalo Bills. I like them. I think this is a better version of Josh Allen, a better version of the Bills offense than we've seen in years prior. Now, I know they just got beat down by the Ravens pretty good, but I think that was a game that was bound to go that way because the Ravens were still backs against the wall in that game. They had to come out and play a great game. They did not have the choice of not playing a great game because they were already, 1-2. They started 0-2. They needed to keep the momentum to get back to 500. So I expected the Ravens to come out and play great. The Bills were kind of playing with, I would say, house money. I don't think anyone expected them to, come out 3-0, look as good as they did. It was at Baltimore. I think it was a recipe for that game to go the way it did. But I think the Bills look great. And I think Josh Allen's the second best quarterback in the NFL, right behind Patrick Mahomes. And to your point, if you were an alien dropped on earth and watching the first 4 weeks of football, I think you'd say Josh Allen's the best quarterback in the NFL. He's played fantastic. This last game didn't play as well, but he's having a great season to start. I like the vibes in Buffalo. I think that they're spreading the ball out a lot more. They're running the ball better. And I don't want to go up against Josh Allen in the playoffs in an offense where they're doing a lot of things that offenses need to do in the playoffs to be creative, but also, Josh Allen's a huge dude and he runs the ball like Lamar, but if Lamar was like 6'6" and 240. So I like the Bills. I've got them at number 5.
Okay. Yeah, I don't hate it. I got them a couple spots lower, but like you said, I think we got them in the top 8. They got to fit in somewhere there. That last game made me a little bit nervous. It just made me, I started looking back at their previous games, and they haven't really played anybody of note. I mean, the Cardinals were probably the best team they played, and that was a pretty close game. I mean, that came down to the wire, end of the game.
I think the Jags are actually better than the Cardinals. I know the Jags are 0-4, and I know that their season is over. But for an 0-4 team, I think they're better than the 1-3 teams.
They're probably better than 0-4, but I don't know where they fit in. All I know is they're 0-4 and they have not looked good this season. The Dolphins, I think the Bills were going to be on a good roll either way. Unfortunately, that was game 2. Obviously, got hurt. He went out pretty early, and they just rolled on him. So I mean, on one point, that is kind of what you got to do to bad teams is beat them up pretty good, which they've done. But again, nobody of a real note to me that were quality wins. And then when they finally get the Ravens, they get smoked, and I get their backs against the wall a little bit. So I do get that they were probably a little hungrier, where the Bills, to your point, probably weren't expecting to be 4-0. So that's a fair point. Like I said, I only had them a couple spots lower. I do like not having Diggs, a star player, being able to spread the ball around a little bit more. I think it's going to free things up. That defense, though, is what scares me. Just the 2 better teams, again, in my opinion. You could say the Jags are up there, but they looked like a mess on offense, for most of this year. put up some significant points. So I like Josh Allen. I do agree he's probably number 2 quarterback. So yeah, we'll see if their next, they got, I think, a decent game coming up, right? Texans. So that's
they're playing the
we might
Texans
touch
this
on that
week. So
later.
I
But
think
that'll
that's a
be a good one.
measuring stick game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Measuring stick game. And speaking of the Texans, they haven't made an appearance on the list yet, but we are on to number 6.
Number
And
6.
it's your call.
It is not the Texans for me. I got I'll take the Steelers at number 6.
We have our first appearance of a team that's not on someone else's top 8.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you were going to let them sneak in somewhere. I figured I'd have them higher than you. I didn't put them on. I had them towards the bottom of it to start, and then I started moving them up a little bit. I mean, I look at it, they got 2 good wins. I mean, the Falcons, they played the Chargers before they ran into any of those injury issues that they just had this past game against the Chiefs. The Chargers have the number 1 defense above the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are at number 2, and they took out the Chargers. I think the Falcons, again, we'll see if they make any of these lists for us, 2-2 team. But again, I think people were high on the Falcons coming in. I think we have seen a good amount from them the last couple games to show us that they are a little better than the record suggests to start. So, I mean, those are 2 good wins. And, it was a bad loss against the Colts. There's no question about that. It was a game you'd normally think they'd win, but similar to your Bills pick. They were playing with house money at that point. We'll talk later, but the 3-1, that was kind of my goal and was pretty, outlandish goal. I mean, it wasn't something people were expecting early. So, it's a game you can easily drop off. But the positive to it for me was, and again, we'll touch on the Steelers a little bit more later, so I won't go into all the stats, but Fields looked really good. That was a game there where you could say, if you had a best case, worst scenario. So if you lose the game, what's the best case you lose that game? I think it was exactly what happened. So again, I'll dig into it a little bit more later, but I think that was the best worst case for them. I think that defense is going to be really good. And I think they stick with Fields. That offense is going to start to look pretty decent for him. So I like them at 6.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little high for me. I will say they were right on the outside of the top 8 for me. They were one of those teams that I was, thinking about for maybe that number 8 spot. So not a ton different from you. But obviously, I think you've been high on them all season, and it looks like, you're certainly trending in the right direction on that pick so far. So now we're on to number 7. So we've only got 2 teams left in our top 8. I got to go with the Houston Texans. I wanted to put them higher. That was the one team that I felt like I want them to be like number 3, number 4 in my ranking. And I couldn't get them that high, but I just think kind of like the Bills, but a little different in the sense that I think that their team around the quarterback has a lot more skill on the Houston Texans, but they've just got one of the top quarterbacks in the league. And they've got a pretty good coach. Their defense is solid. I just think that the Texans are going to be a tough win for any team in the playoffs. And CJ Stroud's already proved that he can win a playoff game. He won one in his rookie season. I think that he's just getting better. I think that team is, sneaky. I think they could maybe have a less than stellar regular season just because they're trying to work through everything, get Diggs incorporated into that offense. They're going through some injuries too. I mean, Mixon hasn't played the last couple weeks, and you can tell that the offense is different. I think you get him back, they start getting that running game back in place, and they're going to be a tough team to beat. If you're running the ball and you've got a great quarterback and a really strong defense, it's a recipe for deep playoff run. So I've got the Texans at number 7, and we've just got one left here. So curious, who are you going to admit into our top 8?
Number 8. I'm trying to debate now through my list which one I'm going to go with. Which one am I going to take more heat on if I don't do it?
He's second guessing himself already.
I guess I have to now that I'm looking at my notes. I'm going to have to go with the Bucs. So I did have the Bucs as my 8th team on my list. But there's a team earlier that has not been said that I decided to actually leave off in the moment here. So just looking at, what they've done in 3-1, solid record. I think, a couple 4-0 teams, but 3-1's right up there. Everyone now is starting to look at the Commanders a little bit differently. So they got a nice win over that. I think it was the first game of the year. So Jay Daniels wasn't, what he has become in 4 games now, but it's been early and he's looked good all year long. So, I mean, that's not a bad team. They beat the Lions. I had the Lions up. I think we both had them up fairly high in the top 4 area. And then they also took out the Eagles. That was the team I actually put the Bucs in right now instead of the Eagles, because I had the Eagles in the top 8. So I think the Eagles are a decent team. They are dealing with some injuries themselves, quite a few injuries now. Yeah, a lot of things still going on with them. I'm still fairly high on the Eagles, so I think that's a good win for the Bucs as well. So yeah, I look at them. I actually think that division's going to be tougher than most of us expected coming into the year, but I still like them to, if not win the division, get a wild card, and make some noise in the playoffs. So I think they're trending in the right direction. Baker's looking good. I got them at number 8.
I like it. I had them number 8. They were a late addition to my list. I actually bumped the 49ers out. I felt almost obligated to put the 49ers in the top 8, but the more I looked at that team, and let's be fair, Brock Purdy is actually playing pretty well this year. Better than I would have expected him to play given their record and the way the games have come out. But I think you're starting to see what the 49ers are going to look like when they pay Brock Purdy a bunch of money and they no longer have all these weapons. Brock Purdy's a good enough quarterback with a really, really good offensive coach, and they're going to do well. But I don't think that they're going to win as many football games because right now they're just like the Avengers, right? So many solid players. Meanwhile, you've got the Bucs, opposite side of the country, and I love everything about that team, honestly. Like it would not shock me if the Bucs won a Super Bowl. Now, I don't think that they should be a favorite, like a top 4 by any stretch, but I think they are a solid team. They've got a lot of guys that were there when Tom was there, and they won a Super Bowl together. It's been a little rocky since then, but I mean, Baker has landed on his feet there in a way that I don't think anybody saw coming. I would guess that Jason Light, the GM of the Bucs, couldn't have even dreamed up a scenario like this. They had a surprising season last year, go into the playoffs, beat Philly, and just drudging them. And that's another reason why I couldn't have the Eagles in my top 8 is the Eagles' last 2 games against the Buccaneers have been awful. They got pounced on in the playoffs against the Bucs. You would have thought that they would have come out with a little fire and energy and like, we want to at least make this like a brawl with the Bucs. Like, we don't want to like get beat down again. And the game just immediately got out of hand for them, just like it did in the playoffs. And it makes me question whether or not the Eagles have what it takes. So I had the Bucs at number 8 on my list. We've got them on, you have them on number 8, and we have them on number 8. So
yeah,
that's our list. So let's recap here. So we've got Chiefs 1, Ravens 2, Vikings 3, Lions 4, shout out NFC North, Bills 5, Steelers coming in at 6, a little high, Texans at number 7, and then number 8, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, led by the Bake Show.
Well, yeah, as far as, too high, I have the top team that you would probably say I left out would be the Texans, because I did not have them in my top 8. I get 3-1 record, but looking at the games they play, they just haven't looked great, and you can give them a little bit of that Pat Mahomes type of, decency to, he's dealing with some stuff. They're working out the kinks. They're still winning a good amount of the games. Obviously, Chiefs, all of them, Texans, most of them, but it's still been too short of a sample size. I 100% agree. I'm all about Stroud. I think he's a great quarterback, but it's still just, it's an early team. I don't think they've earned the right to have these kind of struggles and look bad and justify it as to we're waiting or doing it at the end as much. I mean, this doesn't mean I think they're a bad team. Like I said, I had them basically at 9, so not too far behind there. But yeah, I mean, they barely beat the Colts, beat them by 2. Barely beat the Bears in the second game, which have not looked good to that point. Better game, this past week, I'd say. Got smoked by the Vikings. And then they barely beat the Jags, which sounds like you think they're a little bit better than maybe some of the 1-3 teams, but they beat them by 4. I just don't think they've looked great. Maybe it's the Stephon Diggs working him in. I think the only point you made, which I do get, is Mixon being out. that's fair. If you've been able to notice a difference with him out, obviously he's their top running back. So that's a fair point on that. If he comes back and he's healthy, I think I would bump them up kind of immediately, assuming it's, an easy transition in. But right now, I thought that was probably the team that I just had on the outside, which I figured most people would have in their top 8. So that was probably the top team I left out.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll revisit this. We'll plan to revisit this about midway through the season, so we can get a little midway update on what our top 8 looks like, and see if there's any regrets that we have.
Sure, there'll be a couple.
Bound to be. All right. Well, we are just wrapping up here with part 1, so we're going to take a brief pause, and we will be right back with part 2, where we are going to talk some fantasy football. We're going to talk a little bit more NFL, a little Caleb versus Jaden. We're going to do some overreactions updates, and then we're going to get into games and locks of the week. So you won't want to miss it. Stay tuned for part 2.